first off, then, like, talk to me about how Wholesome Games came to be. Then, what made you want to sort of delve out there and make it an account basically about games that were just sort of cozy and wholesome, basically?
I think one of the things that is important is like the context of James and I live in rural North Carolina. So there's like no game community or like game space for developers or anything like that. So I think we were reaching for something like that to begin with. And then we were really big fans of the two games we were really anticipating at that time were Mineko's Night Market, which I'm still anticipating, and Ooblets. And I think we just felt some sort of connection, some sort of like little movement beneath the water for those games. And I think James was the one who came up with the name. And then I said, oh, well, we'll create a Twitter account. We'll keep it really simple. I'll just post like a game a day and maybe people will be interested in it. We'll just curate it. But I still remember that launch where I think James came up with the basic concept. And then I said, okay, I'll do it. We'll just keep it simple. Like it'll be something we can do while we're still making games. And it just went from there.
You got anything to add to that, James?
Not really. I do think one interesting like aspect of it is that going into it, we were aware of like the concept of cozy games because I think there had been a panel a year or two before that had been about cozy games at PAX West. But I think we like found this distinction where we were like, there are lots of games that do not cozy things. At first it was like more, I guess, like surface examples like battling and Pokemon. We were like, everyone in our community, like, and not everyone, but like 99% of the community is into this game. So like, it's really almost this like retrospective analysis where it's like we saw who the community was, what they were playing, and we tried to like look back and see like what do these games have in common that all these people like them. And of course, like now that it's something we've like eat, slept, and breathed every day for a couple of years now, there are like more stark examples. Like I had someone in the past few months say to me, they were like, Yakuza Like a Dragon is the most wholesome game I've ever played. And so I think that like really kind of shines that light on what like an inclusive genre it has to be, if it's a genre. Like people, I don't know, there's a lot to it. There's a lot of gray area. There's a lot of nuance that I think is part of what makes it fun to discuss and makes it something that attracts so many different people. I guess I had a lot to add, sorry.
More than the original question.
No, that's perfect. I actually want to discuss that nuance later on because I feel that's something that's very important to discuss. But when just going back to sort of how Wholesome Games sort of came to be, as in terms of the Twitter account and then sort of building up the community anyway, like it feels like you sort of carved into what was then a very niche community anyway. And in some regards, you could maybe argue it still is niche, but it feels like the community, well, not maybe it definitely has gotten larger, but it feels like at the time anyway, you were sort of carving into something that was sort of unspoken for at the time anyway.
Yeah, I wish I could say we were like so like smart and prescient that we were like we knew this was going to be a big deal or something like that, but like it was honestly all along something that we were doing for ourselves, to the extent that like when we started the Twitter account, it was like, oh, this will be fun, like maybe we'll like maybe a few people will follow and like share games that they like with us. And then when we started the Discord, it was like, I think maybe 600, 900 people, something like that, joined in the first like week. So we were like, oh, more people are interested in this than we thought. And then when we did the first Wholesome Direct a year ago, before it started, we were like, this was a lot of work to put together, but I think if 500 people watch it, I'll feel like it was worth it. And then it airs, and like I think 130,000 people watched it, and so kind of all along it's been a big surprise for us that it's a big niche. Like it definitely has that, like, the vibe of something that is really like sort of underground like that. But I don't know. I think it's more that there's not a lot of attention paid to it. I loved, was it Business Insider or Forbes? Somebody like that wrote about it and had this really interesting take on it, where they were like, Wholesome Games, like what they're addressing is not a demand problem, it's a supply problem. Like the problem wasn't that there weren't people who wanted to play wholesome games. The problem is that there were a lot of people who wanted to play wholesome games, and an industry that, like, for the most part, didn't like care about reaching those players.
Yeah, I think that was a big reason we started the account in the first place, was like these games. That's what was new about Ooblets and Mineko's Night Market was, and Animal Crossing to a degree, like the idea that adults would want to play these kinds of games. Like I think there had been a long time when it was like, these are kids / Nintendo games.
Casual
games, whatever you want to call it. So like that was a big important part. And I also want to add another milestone moment, which was that Wholesome Games PAX panel that Jenny organized. And Jenny, I know you had done more of those, so you probably have better insight on like tracking the like slow, steady growth of that. But I remember that room being full and I was in the audience. Was
well,
really
an
wild.
organizer from PAX came in before and said, how many people would have to come to this for you to be happy with it? And Jenny said, one.
Yeah.
Which is a wholesome answer.
They said, we've got like 400 people outside waiting. Like it's standing room only.
Yeah,
it's no longer, it's we're no longer in Kansas moment.
Yeah, it really is. We've been lucky to have a few of those.
It's been pretty incredible, because I think exactly what James and Matthew have been saying is this is a group of people, and I think even people who didn't even know they were interested in games, who finally have been able to find camaraderie, in the sense that there are things that match their interests. I remember in college, there was a point in time where, I'd grown up playing games all my life, and I loved Harvest Moon. I loved games that I discovered that had wholesome elements. And in college, it was very much the time of Halo and Gears of War and Call of Duty. And I thought for a while that maybe gaming wasn't for me anymore, because I hadn't found any games like Harvest Moon and Animal Crossing in so long. And so I think this ability, especially to be able to connect with folks like on the Discord, on the Twitter, like social media has played such a powerful role in providing a space for the community to grow and for people to find one another. And I think that's also really exciting.
And the two games I keep mentioning, Ooblets and Mineko's Night Market, they both had good followings. Like it wasn't like Wholesome Games was the first thing to shine a spotlight on them. I think what's unique about Wholesome Games, to Jenny's point, is to show like, oh, if you like this game, like the games that grow our industry, like Stardew Valley or The Sims or whatever, like that's not the exception. Like there's a community for you, and there are more games like that.
I think getting to your point, Jenny, is that at least now with something like Wholesome Games, you're able to find something that is more, you find yourself, what's the word I'm looking for? Like you find yourself more involved in a scene that you feel a sense of belonging to anyway.
Yeah, absolutely. I think I remember, for a while, just as being a kid, like playing video games was kind of like the secret that wasn't cool, and that's not the case anymore. But even when playing video games became more cool and normal and like not a weird nerdy thing, there still was an element of, well, I'd tell people I played like Zelda and I tell people I played Final Fantasy, but I didn't necessarily talk about things like Neopets or Harvest Moon, or, things that weren't as in that sort of cultural zeitgeist of cool video games. And I think there is this element of knowing other people who are excited and interested and having that camaraderie, feeling like you belong, exactly like you said. And knowing that you can be excited about it, I think that's been really important. It's not just like, oh yeah, I play, this casual game on the side, and you don't have to minimalize your excitement about something that you're genuinely interested in. And I think that's been one thing I've enjoyed most about being a part of the community, is being able to just openly love things that are soft and cozy and don't involve violence for the most part.
Yeah, it reminds me of, maybe a year and a half ago, I saw, I don't think it was like a study that they themselves had done, but just had reported on, but I think it was on gamesindustry.biz. They had like published an article on this like study that had been released, or poll that was like, here are the genres that men play most, and here are the genres that women play most. And I thought it was so telling, because it was like, the most played genre for women was casual games. And it was like, there were so many like things lumped into that. It was like basically everything on a phone, everything.
Like it was a sort of stereotypical typecast type thing of
and then the on the most played by men's side, everything was so granular. It was like sports games, racing games, action adventure games, fighting games, 3D fighting games. And I was like, why is it that, and I think that speaks to that like infrastructure problem, that it's like everything is presented as, here are normal games, here are real games, and here's one category for everything else. And I think that's something that we've really tried to tackle, is like showing how much variety there is in that everything else category. When we did I'm a masochist, so I'm like always reading like mean comments on like Twitch and things like that. And
why would you do that to yourself?
Yeah, I can't help it. It's my nature. I got really cracked up because I would see like people trolling it and saying like, they'd watch the Wholesome Direct and say, every game's about cats, every game's about farming, every game looks like Animal Crossing, every game looks like Pokemon, every game has cooking, every game. And I was like, when you get to the point where you've listed like 12 to 15 different things that you think every game has, like maybe there's just a lot of variety in this like genre. Like I feel like sometimes people miss the point on purpose, but we're trying our best to counter that.
So now that you've sort of built up this community, now you've sort of gotten the name out there, it feels like, and I actually, there's one or two developers that have mentioned this to me. I was actually, it was a few weeks ago, actually, I was speaking to Ryan and Shandine Woodward of Subliminal about Button City. And they mentioned to me how Ooblets feels like sort of the game that sort of signified the Wholesome movement, or at least the Wholesome movement as we know it anyway. Although I might be misconstruing what they said anyway. So please don't take it as complete gospel. Anyway, what do you think is the game that sort of signified the Wholesome movement for all three of you? Like obviously Ooblets would be one. And Matt, you said as well, Minigo's Night Market as well, even though it's not even out yet, but what do you think has sort of signified the Wholesome movement? Like, let's stand anyway.
I think growing up for me, it was Animal Crossing for sure, in terms of the first game that introduced like a lot of mechanics and verbs and stuff that changed the way I think about games. But I think it's fair to say Ooblets, and I would never say that Wholesome Games can't have violence or anything like that, but Ooblets, like when they did that thing where they went to dance battles, and it was the right decision for them in that game, in that context with those characters, that certainly made me think a little more deeply about like trying to buck trends and find new mechanics and new ways to express things that maybe games weren't doing normally. So I do think it's fair to say Ooblets kind of drove a lot. But to be fair to Ryan and Shantine, Button City is like definitely an original Wholesome game, like one of the first games I posted on the account. So they in and of themselves helped inspire the account.
Yeah, actually, when we started the Discord, it was kind of like blog rings from back in the day. Like one of the original ideas for us on Discord was that it would just be like, we weren't even planning on it being a destination in itself. It was just going to be like, we're going to like find these indie games in development, and we're going to have like a channel for each one where they can like say, here's what our game is, and here's where you can find our server about it. So like, it was just sort of like supposed to be this nexus for finding other Wholesome game servers. And Ooblets and Button City and Snacko, like a few of those games were part of that like original like 5 people in the blog ring. And I think that's part of Ooblets, like why it feels so important to us too, is that at that time when Wholesome Games probably had 50 followers, like Ooblets, Ben and Rebecca being like, yeah, we'll be part of this. We were like, oh my God, like Ooblets will be part of our, like, even though it was like basically just a link to their server, like we were so thrilled. Matthew and I made music before we got into games, and like that world is so much like less connected, I guess, in terms of like, if I like email my favorite musician, I'm probably not going to get a response. But it was so wild to like move into games and be like, well, here's like the game we're most excited about, and you can message the developer and get like a real response from them. So I think that was really cool.
And I'm still starstruck by Ben and Rebecca, just to be clear.
Oh, that's lovely. That's, forgive the pun, rather wholesome.
I think to the original question, I think A Short Hike is up there for me too, as like it's one that I don't think it was out yet when we started Wholesome Games, but when it came out, it was like, oh, this is kind of what it's all about. Like,
yeah. Well, just as important as it is to have that like launch pad with a game like Ooblets to post about, it's also very important to have something to keep propelling you. And a game like A Short Hike really propelled us, I think.
Well, it let us flap up a few times.
Yeah, they gave us a few golden feathers.
like I totally get where you come from anyway. Like I don't know if at that point I would have heard of Wholesome Games, the Twitter account and community and stuff like that there. But when I heard of a short hike, it was because I saw Rebecca Valentine streaming it on Twitch. And now I have it sitting on my computer waiting to be played, because I am a sorry gamer who has just a sorry backlog. But I have it from the BLM bundle, and I've been dying to play it for the longest time. And so I guess in a way this is sort of a roundabout question, but like, no, there was no question. Sorry, I lost my train of thought.
That's all right.
Happens to all of us.
But yeah, I mean, like I guess now that Wholesome Games has been about for a good while, it also helps, and because you sort of built up this massive community as well, like it adds to the fact that there's now a lot more focus on Wholesome Games, that there's a lot more people who can see these games a lot more easily than, say, when I saw Reb streaming the game, like, and now I could probably say there's a lot more Wholesome Games that I know because of Wholesome Games. Like the curation and the audience reach anyway is a lot bigger than certainly it was when you founded it.
Oh yeah, absolutely. They're definitely like once a day someone will tweet at me and say, wow, I can't, but like one of the most authentic impressions I get is someone tagging their friend and saying, look, a whole feed of games like blank. And of course, it's like James said earlier, like the games are really varied, and yet people know exactly that it's exactly what they were looking for when they see it. So that's definitely been a really cool thing to introduce people to so many games.
What's been really exciting too is because I remember just sort of back in the day when I was starting out streaming and content creation, I hadn't met James or Matthew yet. And it felt very alone to, again, be seeking out these games and playing these games because nobody was really featuring them. And now on Twitch and YouTube and TikTok, I mean, the number of content creators who are focusing specifically on wholesome games, on cozy games, on fostering communities of people who play games who aren't, of the normal gamer sort of cloth, I think has been really exciting to see. So it's not just like on our end, us curating games and sort of talking about them, but it's encouraged other people to do that. And that's been really exciting, I think, for me to see in particular.
When did you start sort of doing the sort of content streaming thing anyway, Jenny? Like, when was that?
Gosh, I think around 2016, around about then. I was still teaching middle school then. So I was an educator by day and then played video games by night. And was very, very cursory about it and very casual about it. But yeah, about 2016.
Like the mystery superhero just sort of keeping their sort of secret identity on
Yeah.
the side.
Well, and it's interesting because originally a lot of my content creation was fueled by the desire, to learn a lot of the technology I knew my students would probably need and want to learn, learning basic video editing, Photoshop type of things. But also I wanted to bring games into the classroom, and I needed to find games that were appropriate to bring into the classroom, and would help, foster the different lessons that I was trying to teach. So not only was I personally interested in games that were more wholesome, but I also needed to find them out of necessity, because there are some really interesting things can be discussed about, Gears of War, Halo, Call of Duty. I listed those before, but those are not necessarily games I would bring into a middle school classroom, for a variety of reasons. So I think my education background definitely fueled my desire to find these kind of games, to be able to share that excitement with kids as well.
Because nothing says sweet and wholesome like bringing a game to something like 8 to 10-year-olds and then having them just sort of chainsaw Lucas, basically.
Yeah. Parents probably wouldn't have been very happy with that.
What specific games were you looking to what were you showing to your students anyway at that time?
Well, that was back in the day when Minecraft was still the new frontier. And that's kind of what got me thinking.
What is Minecraft?
I know, back in the day when Minecraft was shiny new. Well, and it wasn't even that new, but it was just starting to become this thing that was used more than just as a game and used in the classrooms as an educational tool for students to be able to create things and collaborate. And I thought that was really, really cool. And eventually, to be very honest, I just didn't really enjoy Minecraft. So I wanted to look for something else that I could use with my students. And so that's kind of what helped, again, propel me to look for more. And dive back into games a little bit more. And I remember actually the first game, it's more on the bittersweet side, but it's still very wholesome. I played To the Moon. And that was a game that I was like, okay, so I could see myself bringing something like, maybe not exactly To the Moon, but something like To the Moon to my class. We could play it in one sitting, we could discuss it. And these are things that I found really exciting, because a lot of wholesome games, due to a variety of factors, tend to be a little bit shorter than sort of the AAA big budget type of games, just because a lot of these are still quite indie. And so I found myself realizing that this was not only a genre that thematically had a lot for students to explore, but also lengthwise, accessibility wise, they didn't need higher end computers. I could fund keys for my classes if I needed to, because they were not, $60, $70 games. So as an educator and someone who is trying to, encourage more people to play games, because I think it's a wonderful medium. I think not just with kids, but with other adults, it's really exciting how accessible the genre is. Aesthetic. I don't know what to call it sometimes.
I like genre.
Yeah.
To be honest, I struggle sort of defining it anyway, but that I actually want to ask about that in a little bit. Moving on. Before this year's Wholesome Direct, and the Wholesome Direct, I want to touch on in more broader detail in a minute. But like just before this year's Direct, anyway, you sort of put out the definition of not a definition, sorry, but an FAQ of what I can't even talk. What the definition of a wholesome game is, and leaving that and like leaving the interpretation of what a wholesome game is up to the person who was reading it. But you also mentioned as well that there's very much a toxic positivity. See, can't talk. There is a toxic positivity aspect of term wholesome anyway. And so I think this is why there was a bit of a kerfuffle just before the Direct, because I remember, again, coming back to Red Valentine, I remember her tweeting like something about how Wholesome Games and a discourse around it. I was just like, what's going on now? And I think the sort of general broad overview is sort of how wholesome games are interpreted or how they're seen, basically. And do correct me if I'm sort of getting any of this wrong. But how important was that for you guys to sort of put out there anyway? That sort of general FAQ before the Direct anyway, in terms of what is the definition of a wholesome game, or the definition of wholesome as a sort of expression, and then also as well the sort of toxic positivity aspect of the term wholesome as well.
I think it was very important to put out before the Direct, because the whole goal of the Direct is to put the focus on the developers. So it would have been a real shame if we made something like that and people were still asking these questions about the host instead of about the game. So it was very good to get it out there before and answer those questions. And I think a lot of the answers to those questions had been floating around. And actually, a couple developers came to us and said, hey, I know all this stuff about you guys, but can you put it all in one space? Like, can you make it really easy for anyone who sees Wholesome Games, maybe has a bad first impression, maybe just hates the word wholesome, whatever it may be. There are lots of genuine concerns. Can you put it all in an easy to find space and make this stuff known? And that's really what the FAQ was. And it was definitely a response in part to some of the misinterpretations that were out there shortly before the Direct, which basically coincided with the Direct getting that press, like that first kind of marketing push when we put out a press release.
It's I should also mention as well, like this is actually referenced to me for the first time in an interview I did with Megan Fox about Skatebird. That's actually one of the shorter episodes of Press Play that I'm going to be doing. And she mentioned to me, I don't know if you guys will have seen it or not, but she mentioned to me the Cozy Games Manifesto. I don't know if you guys will have seen it yet or not.
I haven't.
I think so.
You know what I'll do? I don't know if I'll be able to do it now. Will I be able to do it now? I might be able to do it now. I'm actually going to send you a link to the Cozy Games Manifesto, because it was her that sent it to me. There we go. This is from 2018. So it says it is from a game designer think tank called Project Horseshoe. And the think tank consisted of Tanya Short of Kit Fox, Anthony Orden, Dan Hurd, Chelsea Howe, Jake Forbes, Squirrel Izorlaw, I don't know how to pronounce it, I apologize, Joshua Diaz, Daniel Cook, and Ron Miniers. And it was just to give the sort of general overview. It was just basically the blog itself just basically goes into how it sees Cozy Games. I'm just going to drop this in the chat if I can get this out of the way.
I think I may actually have seen this. I think this
Same.
maybe was related to the panel.
PAX panel.
Yeah, that I mentioned before. But I guess I forgot it was called the Cozy Games Manifesto.
No, I
That
just agree.
sounded a lot more menacing than what I think it actually is.
Yeah. Yeah, this actually was one thing that influenced a lot of my own thinking about cozy and wholesome games in general as well. And I actually remember talking with Tanya before doing my Wholesome Games panel the very first time, and this was years ago, and I was still also very like, I was starstruck because I had just like seen Tanya at a cafe and it was like GDC. I was just like, I read this and I really like it, and I'm just, she doesn't know who I am, and it was all sorts of wonderful for me, and I'm sure maybe awkward for her, but yeah, I think what was really exciting about this article in particular is it dives into not only a lot of the rewinding a little. So a lot of times when we hear and discuss coziness and wholesomeness in games, a lot of times folks attribute it to the visual aesthetic. And perhaps they think about the narrative as well if they're thinking a little bit lower, sort of like down tiers. But what I loved about this article in particular is it dives into mechanically how can designers create systems, worlds, and like design for coziness versus just sort of slap it on at the top on the surface level. And it's a great read.
Yeah, definitely.
So this is going to be a bit of a sort of catch-22 question here for all three of you, but like, what do you think is your personal definition of a wholesome game? Obviously the core pillars are there, like it's cozy, it's warm, it's relaxing, and it's safe. But bearing those four core themes in mind, like what else do you think would sort of fit in within your personal definition of a wholesome game anyway?
I think, sorry.
Oh, no, go ahead.
One of the first ways I described it on Twitter was like just describing games by how they made you feel instead of necessarily what mechanics are in there. And I think that's why like we get into this, is it a genre kind of conversation? Because typically genres are very strictly the mechanics. It's a fighting game, it's a first person shooter game, whatever. I think in our Twitter bio, I describe it as thoughtful, uplifting, compassionate, cozy. I really like uplifting and thoughtful because I think it describes games like Spiritfarer or something where like you can absolutely cry, it can get into dark themes, but at the end of the day, there's some element of humanity and hopefulness there. So I think those are kind of the elements I look for. And those are the things that like Jenny was saying, like it's very easy to just slap on a cute aesthetic onto a game that otherwise doesn't have those elements. So I'm always kind of trying to look beneath the surface and find those elements.
I think uplifting is really important for me. I think that's how you end up in a situation where someone describes a game like Yakuza Like a Dragon as wholesome because they see, yes, it's a game with lots of like threats and danger and bad things happen, but it's not a game that says like these bad things happen and it's game over, the world just sucks. Like it's one that says, sure, these things happen to you, but it gives a path forward, I guess. Like even if it's hard, there is a path, there's a reason to keep going. And I think that's a big part of it for me.
And I think I 100% agree with everything they've said. And to add to that, I think one thing I've realized is we see this a lot, especially in sort of Studio Ghibli films, but magic in the mundane is how I like to put it, where it's not just, it's taking things that we sort of take for granted, like cooking, I think is a really great example where it's something that is part of our lives and we often don't give it a second thought. But when a game that has like you're making soup, you're making hot pot, and it creates this magical experience around a mundane seeming activity. I think that for me is a really key component of what makes games personally wholesome.
And it's funny that you mentioned as well, Studio Ghibli. It's amazing how many developers I've spoken to. So many of them over the past month and a half have referenced Studio Ghibli as a reference.
Yeah, I think those films always like buck the typical trend of like very clear villain, very clear good guy. Like in the end, a lot of the characters are redeemed, or we find out that they were going through their own struggle. And that again is that hopeful and uplifting
They
element.
also represent what we always talk about with like they're from a genre that a lot of people would have written off as like this is for kids. Like it's kind of the same story with Pixar, where it's like these are because it's animation. Once upon a time, there were lots of people who would say like, "I'm a grown up. I don't watch animation." And I think it's kind of the same way with where people said, "I don't play these casual games," or these games are childish or too colorful or whatever. Is you see Ghibli like create this reputation, this they established that like it can be something that is appropriate for Jenny's like kids in middle school, and it's absolutely like enriching and dramatic and worthwhile for all of us adults too. So I think that's a big key for a lot of people.
I apologize, by the way, if my dog's
Oh,
making
no.
any noise. You probably see him
Not at
walking
all.
around the background.
Oh, he's
enhancing it.
Yeah.
He's sort of prancing about in the background, and now he's just gone off into the bedroom. Anyway, just to sort of pick up on a point you made there, James, is about like that's sort of also coming across in what is usually cartoons for sort of older kids, younger teenagers. We're starting to sort of watch and find meaning in them as well, like Steven Universe, Adventure Time, something like stuff like that as well. Like,
Yeah.
like we adults are watching them, but like at the same time, there's one or two out there judging like what are you doing watching those? They're for kids. They're for children. Why are you grown ass people watching it?
Oh, it's interesting as it relates to games too, because like, play in general is something that a lot of people grow out of. And I think that's a terrible thing. And I think what these cartoons and games and everything have in common is some lessons are universal and some elements need to continuously be revisited, like to keep them alive. So hopefully that's something Wholesome Games offer people. And that's something like, people have been talking about that with Nintendo games for a long time, like this element that it just continually kind of revives that child within you.
Yeah, I want to make games that have the experience for me that Kiki's Delivery Service did. Going back to the Ghibli example, where it's a movie that I watched when I was 8 years old, and I loved it for one reason, and then I revisited it when I was like 16 and related to a different character, and I loved it for a new reason, and then I rewatch it when I was 25 and I relate to a different character and I love it for a new reason, and now I watch it at 33 and I think like, wow, like every artist should like watch this movie. Like this says such interesting things about like burnout and your art becoming your job. And I think that says it all, really, that it's like it's not just about giving adults the freedom to enjoy things without thinking, oh no, this is for kids, I should be embarrassed or something. I think it's also about respecting the intelligence and maturity of kids and saying like, it doesn't just have to be like bright colors flashing on a screen. You can present things to them that will help them like learn and grow as people, the same way that this media helps us as adults learn and grow as people.
To kind of jump off of that as well, because now my brain's like thinking about it, but it's like the ability for someone to address some of these tougher topics like burnout or grieving a lost loved one. Like I think sometimes it can be easier and feel more safe, and a space can be created where someone can do that when it is in a package that isn't so hyper realistic. So I think that like Spiritfarer is a really great example where you are going through, there's a gameplay element, you're exploring, you're having fun, you're meeting friends. It provides a space where I think players can feel safe. And once they have that sort of feeling, they can start diving into topics that are heavier and more thoughtful and probably will require just a little bit more of that emotional vulnerability to play versus again, kind of going into a hyper realistic game that sort of like hits you on the head with, you know, something that really sucks, and you have to sort of just like bear the brunt of it really up front. So I think there's a sort of accessibility and safety that happens in a lot of these games as well.
Absolutely.
I know Matthew recently finished playing Mother 3, and I think that one's a great example of that, where it's like it has some really big ideas, like money being introduced to this like society for the first time. And I think it would be that's like a thought experiment and a topic that would be so like dry as to like never interest me as a kid otherwise. But you put it in a game. I mean, honestly, like I think there are lots of adults that would be bored by it, but then games give us these ways to like frame these things and talk about them that make them engaging and give you a new perspective on it that I think is really cool and unique.
And just to touch on a point that you made a minute or two ago, Jenny, like that, those sort of mundane experiences, like, you know, sort of making food and all that there, and the sort of Studio Ghibli reference, like obviously it was actually mentioned in the Cozy Games manifesto, but the sort of stove character in Howl's Moving Castle, and it made me think of that, and obviously the Studio Ghibli references, and then sort of your reference in terms of mundane games with certain like mundane stuff like that there, like cooking and all that there. And it made me think of, and I literally, because I actually was writing about it today on Play Diaries, I was actually thinking about Soup Pot. So I just figured that was worth mentioning as well. So where am I? I want to discuss sort of wholesome elements in non-wholesome games. Now, there's a few examples of this. Like there's the friendship dynamic in Final Fantasy 15, like the sort of all boys road trip where, like, for the most part, the reception seems to be it is just this very wholesome and wonderful sort of non-toxic sort of friendship between four men, basically. And then also as well, like, you got hanging out with your friends, having dinner with your friends in Persona 5.
Yeah, discovered a new recipe.
Yeah. And even outside of that, like you mentioned as well, Yakuza Like a Dragon. Like, people are saying that's a wholesome game, but like it's not a wholesome game in terms of how we sort of traditionally view a wholesome game, because the wholesome game, for the most part, we sort of traditionally view as happy-go-lucky, bright colors and stuff like that. There, Yakuza Like a Dragon, on paper anyway, is not what we would define in the traditional sense a wholesome game. But like people are saying, you know, there's elements in Yakuza Like a Dragon that is wholesome. Now, I should clarify up front, I've not played Like a Dragon, but there's elements as well of older Yakuza games, like let's say, for example, Yakuza 0, Yakuza Kiwami, etc., where there's very non-toxic, wholesome moments in that as well. And even Undertale, like, because like I was so the other podcast Play Diaries does, My Favorite Game, we did a 2-episode arc on Undertale. The first part was with Victoria Tran. The second one was with Kitty Crawford. She was like, so Undertale is not a wholesome game on paper, pretty much the same way as Yakuza, but like it has wholesome elements of it. And a lot of that is the sort of repeated line that Kitty was saying to me, is that Undertale has this sort of kill them with kindness mantras to it. So like, I sort of want to get your take on sort of how you interpret wholesome aspects in what is otherwise non-wholesome games, basically.
Yeah, Undertale's a great example. I remember in that Cozy Games panel at GDC that we keep referencing. They talked about like a home base element being like something that can exist in any game. And I wonder what we'll see in that regard, because there are some elements that just like absolutely any game can have. Any game can have elements of befriending someone and that increasing your bond and your abilities, even
always
if those
think of,
abilities are in battle.
Terrytown in Breath of the Wild as like
Oh my God,
a
yeah.
really like comforting home base.
And it's interesting because I mean, side quests are such a great opportunity for it, because it can be completely removed from, you know, the A story or the main mechanics or whatever it may be. You can do something completely different.
One we talked about a lot when it came out was Death Stranding, like how many moments in that game, like every time you make a delivery, like they really go out of their way to have people say like, thank you so much, like we really needed this and you really helped us by doing this. Like I guess the whole like focus on making connections as opposed to like splitting people apart, or driving enemies away. Like I think that's something that is really compelling. Like I mean, I think the presence of wholesome elements and otherwise what we'd consider like not wholesome games is like that has to be the case for wholesome games to be something that's interesting and something that lasts, because it means the things that make a game wholesome are interesting enough that you would want to include them in a non-wholesome game. Like it's not purely an aesthetic decision. It's not purely we're gonna make this game look like soft and colorful. It's some like fundamentally interesting, good feeling things that any game can sort of take advantage of.
And it kind of goes to show you, like, I don't know, obviously there have been games for a long time that had wholesome elements, but like we started with a pretty low bar, I think, in the game industry, because right now we're discussing like something as basic as friendship as being something that's like wholesome. And it's like, it's not, it's just like, it's a part of being alive. It's a part of like making a dynamic piece of media.
It's basic human instinct.
Yeah, exactly. So like, I think that's why wholesome games are needed, because like this has got to be in the conversation for every game. Like, I'm not saying every game needs a friendship mechanic, but like it certainly shouldn't be something where we're like, wow, I can't believe an otherwise, you know, normal quote unquote game has this element. So
there's a part in Chrono Trigger, like speaking of a pretty old game with a wholesome element, where it's like back in the past and there's this family that lives on a farm and the field's like gone totally barren. It's like a desert, and you have this robot character in your party and you leave him there and go to the future. And over the course of like 1,000 years, he's like terraformed that farm and like rescued it so that that like, or I guess I've got it backwards. You like go back to the past and like basically save that farm before those people exist, by letting your like robot character, who's I guess immortal, like terraform and like improve that land over the course of like millennia. And what just like I don't know, it's tough to even like put a label on it and call it like wholesome or anything like that, because it's just like, I don't know that I would play games if they never had elements like that, if there were never these moments where you were just like,
Just sort of typical games, basically.
yeah, it's just like this is my goal as like a human, is to like make the world like better in some way, to like have an impact on someone's life, that like they're I want them to be better off in some way than they were before they met me. And it's like, if games didn't give me an opportunity to explore that and engage with that feeling, I don't know that I would be that interested. Like at that point, then to me, it's like purely like my reflexes, which suck. Like I'm not that great at like other parts of games, but I think that's why I grew up playing so many RPGs, was because those felt like the games where it was a way to explore like feelings and ideas, and that's something that I've always been drawn to.
I mean, most
Yeah.
games, no matter what, are going to present you with a conflict, and you're the hero in most games. But in wholesome games, like, the answer to that conflict is not kill the bad guys like the other side. So I think that's what's interesting, because like what you just described in Chrono Trigger, like you're the good guy in that game for most of the game. Being a good guy, pardon me, for most of the game, being a good guy means killing the bad guys. But in this moment, it was like helping this family that you maybe didn't even know that well, and it was completely
I mean, in
unrelated.
fairness, I think there's a monster under the desert that turns it into a desert, so you
Oh,
have to
no.
kill something too.
Okay.
It was the 90s. Like,
It was-
give them time. But I think the evolution of that is today we talk about A Short Hike, and it's a game. I always reference this moment where there's a character that you can buy a hat from, and they make this straw hat. You can buy it for like 50 coins, whatever the currency is. And then you have the opportunity to say, like, no, it's worth more. Your time was worth more than that. I'm going to pay you more. And like, you can pay them more and you don't get anything extra for it. It's just, like I mentioned before, it's a way to sort of like engage with the goodness in you. Like, it's a way to like role play a better world, a world where you say, like, I want people to feel appreciated. And I think that's really cool.
Yeah, I wanted to mirror that sentiment exactly, because I mentioned earlier that a lot of time in college, I went through this like crisis in gaming where I was like, none of these games allow me to behave the way I want to behave. If I was in this situation, I would want to problem solve in a very different way. And so just like James is saying, having games that have alternatives to the sort of run and gun problem solving tactic that's in many titles has been really exciting. And from a more macro standpoint and like just a games standpoint, I think it's much more interesting and exciting that we've gone from, I think, this sort of like low hanging fruit of most extreme emotions, adrenaline, action, horror, and we've started to delve into this sort of next tier of, hey, here are ways we can play with softness and not being violent. And I think what's really exciting is the games that are starting to maybe aren't necessarily wholesome, but integrate wholesome elements are doing what is sort of this next, I don't want to call them generation per se, but they're doing something more and providing more dynamic experiences for us as players. So as humans, we are not 100% violent all the time or 100% cozy all the time. And so when games integrate that and have like volume levels and like dynamic levels, it allows us to just also have better games. So I think what's really exciting is, and we've mentioned this before in other talks we've done, but like, can you pet the dog? I think that's an experience that games now kind of put in, even if they're not wholesome, because it provides a different sense of pacing, a moment of levity, a moment of gentleness amidst everything else, regardless of the game genre. I think nearly every game now has a pet something mechanic in it. So it's really neat to see games of all types being pushed to think differently about how players will engage. So.
No, definitely. By the way, James, I just have to say, Death Stranding as an example, I didn't like. I did not think of that.
I think I mentioned that one at the PAX panel we did, because I was like, is there something I can say that would like get booed? Like I want to push a button and see.
Push the most wholesome
Untitled Goose Game. It was like standing ovation, and I was like, what can I say that this crowd's going to be like? Let me think about that.
I was in the crowd as a plant. I get up, walk away angry.
Get out. Oh, that would have been that. No, no, that's 10 out of 10 answer. Right. So in general, then I want to talk about the Wholesome Direct. Then, obviously, like it first sort of came out as part of everything that was going on with the pandemic. But what sort of planted the seed in your heads to sort of do a showcase to think maybe we should do a thing on this, like that really shows off Wholesome Games as this thing that could become a movement in itself?
I remember the words cozy con came up a couple times, and I don't know if that was on the back of
I think
PAX.
Jenny might have been behind the term cozy
Yeah,
con.
cozy con is something I've dreamed of for years.
Yeah, like that started getting tossed around. I think I kind of like laughed at it at first because it was just like a dream, like that couldn't possibly happen, right? And then everything starts getting canceled and put online. And we had a lot of friends, like a lot of developers we knew through the Twitter and Discord who, they would say things like, my whole release strategy was GDC, like, or this other convention, like I'm completely screwed now. And so giving them an opportunity was really cool. And also in the midst of all the pandemic stuff, like it kind of leveled the playing field a little bit, because even the biggest companies were scrambling to figure out how they were going to do something online. And I grew up as a really big fan of like E3 showcases in general. Like it was just, again, living in rural North Carolina, that was my way I could connect. Like no matter what, I could tune into those.
We're the type of dorks that, like 2 weekends ago, a friend came over and we all watched like old E3s together for fun.
Yes.
That is the
Yeah.
most fun thing ever. Please
Yeah.
invite me to the next one.
Yeah.
Yeah. We were specifically watching clips of Reggie Fils maybe like really aggressive.
My name is Reggie. I'm about kicking ass. I'm about taking names. And we're about making games.
And we're like, God, this never happens
Yeah,
anymore.
it's like
Like,
shocking to see
Passive
from
aggressiveness, like
way
sort
back
it
of,
was
if
wild.
you're looking
And
for high definition
different
graphics,
business.
you're in the
Was it the Game
wrong
Boy?
place.
Was it the Game Boy Micro we were watching where they were like, and you can put it in your pocket no matter how skinny your jeans are?
A new look in the sense that no matter how tight your jeans, it'll still fit in your pocket.
Was it the Game Boy Micro we were watching where they were like, and you can put it in your pocket no matter how skinny your jeans are? We were like, what a great blast from the past.
Wow.
Yeah, that's a time
That was the
capsule.
time. Yeah.
And not to be such a downer, but literally the E3 before the pandemic stuff was my last E3 with my friend Steve, who passed away. And we would always get together with Steve for E3. Like I have so many E3 memories with Steve. And that was the E3 where New Horizons was announced, and it was just like a big deal in general. And so we dedicated that first direct to Steve, and we've dedicated both of them to him. And that's just a great example. Like I love these showcases. So the idea of getting to put together our own was really cool.
Well, and it gave us this motivation of like, we're going to try to put together a showcase that like Steve would enjoy. Like it's not purely about, I mean, I guess I shouldn't say this. It's not purely about like promoting any particular game or anything like that. It's about like making a showcase that is as fun for people today as like watching those showcases growing up was for us. When I say growing up, I mean like until still today.
Growing up.
Yeah, continuing to grow up.
I will say it was a little nerve-wracking because like in the same way, Ooblets or whatever took hold of the Discord, and like we were surprised that they would be engaged with it. Same thing with the Wholesome Direct, where like I'm surprised that they offered a completely original, really cool trailer. Because at the end of the day, that's what's going to make or break it, is like how many people want to contribute to it, and are they willing to contribute good stuff, or are they just like sending you the same trailer they're going to send to everybody else, and there's no reason to watch it.
Well, and once we find out that like Ooblets and Spirit Fair and these games that like we really are excited about are like taking part on it, we're like, oh God, we've never done this before. Like, what if everyone like agrees to like pitch in for this and then no one sees it? Like, what we really don't want to drop the ball on this because we've got 50 developers counting on us.
But that really is how the dominoes start to fall. Is like you have this idea, you start to reach out to people, and then once a few of the really big names to me like Spirit Fair and Ooblets come on board, you think, okay, there's demand here, and you start reaching out to more people, and it just really snowballs like that.
just to pick up on something you said, man. This to get like I might be misinterpreting it, but this is at least in terms of the idea of Wholesome Direct. This was an idea that came just before the pandemic.
It really came as the pandemic began,
Right.
because so we went to PAX East and it was like literally the best weekend of my life. Like I met so many cool people. It was the first time I met Jenny in person.
Yeah.
I met so many cool people. We were showing our game. It was the first time we had shown our game at like a bigger convention like that. And just everything worked out. It was like the perfect experience, a huge sense of community. And then the pandemic was like there, you know, it was already happening at that point. People just weren't taking it very seriously yet. And then after that, events started to get canceled. Like we were literally at a little event when the GDC news came over, and like the head of the Indie Mega booth was like talking about, okay, here's what we're gonna do. Like everybody's scrambling to figure it out. And that's when we really started to think about some of our friends who were gonna lose out on all these opportunities to showcase their game.
I think credit where it's due also is the developers of Button City like really did kind of like push for, they were the ones who I think sort of convinced us that they were like, we're serious, we need this, can you, if you do this, we will like put everything we can into like helping you like make it work.
Yeah, it's such a group effort in that way.
Because we didn't know, and then when we announce it on like Twitter and start saying like, hey, here are the signups for any developers who are interested, people start saying, I want this even if there's not a pandemic. Like, I think you should do this even if like in-person events continue next year. And I think that really clued us in that it was something that people were interested in.
And one day we'll get to do it without the pandemic behind it. I pray.
So how many sort of developers signed up for the first one, just out of curiosity? Can you mention the number?
I remember we put out a form, and the form was as general as like, are you interested in seeing this? Like, what would you do? Would you like co-stream it? Would you submit a game? Would you help us edit it?
A testament to how little interest we thought there might be. One of the options on our like survey was, I will watch it. Like we were like just gonna see like, is this something people are interested in at all?
Yeah, I think we even had like, I'll watch it live. Like, I'll watch it later, that kind of thing. So
very useful data.
So I think that sign up had like around 300 entries, but that counts so many people who were just saying, I'm going to watch it, like not even developers. And then this year, the second time around, it was like a little over 300, all like quality developers submitting their games kind of thing. So,
this year was. So like the first year was really tough to like pick games for it too, but this year it was just like impossible. Like there were more like good games than we could have possibly had time for.
Yeah, I remember we kind of decided like over an hour of like straight games, no one would be able to pay attention for that long. So like we did have to put some constraints on ourselves and cut some really good games.
And even as much as we curate it, you still get like some people who say like, I wish it didn't move as quickly. Or like, I wish like you were able to spend more time on each game. And we're like, we do too, but it's tough.
I guess you sort of answered it there, but I just sort of want to get a more broader response. How do you guys just sort of go about planning a direct down?
It's a lot of Google Forms. It's a lot of Google spreadsheets. It's really
sends
simple.
like 600 emails.
Yeah, I mean, the first step is just gathering the games, and we did that through a Google form, and that's something I'm really proud of. That's something we took inspiration from Day of the Devs, where like I always appreciate it as an indie developer that it's really simple. There's just a form, submit a trailer, build whatever it is. Like it's a very level playing field for everyone. So we got all those, and then we all got in a big Discord call and went over a list and said, okay, we think this is a guarantee, this one's on the verge, this one's maybe a no because of this or that, like literally looking through every trailer. And then like James said, I just start sending emails, trying to get everyone on board with like what element of this is going to be exclusive, how long is it going to run, like trying to make sure everything times up. Some developers want to contribute like interviews, which I think is really cool, like a good way to show the people behind the games. And yeah, it just goes from there, just trying to kind of create some deadlines.
I think we were pretty strict about like the length of each developer segment, and I feel like that's a big part of it. I just think that's a major factor in how the Wholesome Direct stays entertaining.
And I think one thing to add that I don't think Matthew's touched on was even after the games are selected, people are submitting all of their video footage. We have volunteers who are helping translate it to multiple languages, as well as, myself and the co-host recording. So what's really exciting, I think, about the Wholesome Direct in particular is that I don't know of any other direct or any other showcase that really tries to provide like language options in the ways that Wholesome does. And I think that has a community that's like translating and helping make it happen. So it really, like, beyond just even the developers, it's a team effort to make sure that as many people can watch it as possible.
Absolutely.
And then just to touch on sort of your roles with the direct, Jenny, like in terms of presenting and all that there, like what goes in behind that anyway?
I really have the most fun and easy job, I think. So what happens is Matthew and James, they help create a script for myself and the co-hosts who are involved. We usually get the script, before recording. We look at it, sort of get familiar with it, and we just take a couple of hours to get into sort of a virtual recording booth together and make sure it all sort of comes out okay. Yeah, and it's been honestly just a real joy participating in the process each time. While I do help with the initial sort of review of games and that big spreadsheet that Matthew was talking about, I also tried not to, and I think there was maybe a trailer or two that was kept secret from me, because I know that there was one surprise that we watched that I didn't see even before.
Yeah,
that was really cool. But yeah, it really is just like, it's so cheesy, but it doesn't feel like work at all, at least from that end of things, because it's just so fun, because really it's us hanging out, talking about these games, recording our reactions to seeing trailers, and just enjoying each other's company, which is great.
Yeah, this year I really did want it to feel like you were just watching the showcase with these three cool people, and that's an element of it that makes it really fun, like knowing that Jenny is genuinely very excited for a game like Yokai, like it makes it more fun to get that trailer and be like, oh my god, I can't wait to show this to Jenny.
Those reaction clips were real. That was the like first time the hosts were seeing those trailers.
Yeah.
So that was the actual surprise that sort of caught you out. Oh.
Yeah. So that made it very fun for me, because I think the year prior, I don't think we had any surprise moments. And I think the year prior, we also didn't have, like, it was Josh and myself, and it was primarily just voice. I don't think we had our faces on anything. So seeing the evolution also, and feeling the evolution of being able to react and emote a little bit more in that way was really fun.
So this year's direct, I think I can also, I've said this to James obviously, but I sort of alluded to this earlier, but like last year's Wholesome Direct was for me the highlight of the sort of traditional E3 announced period. Like it was genuinely what was needed at the time, considering we were like literally at the start of the pandemic, the height of it. Like it was very much what was needed. It was basically a cozy blanket in terms of everything else that was sort of going on, not just necessarily in the world, but in the industry as well, in terms of everything else, just sort of everyone focusing on AAA stuff. And again, there was no E3. It was just sort of a Wild West, basically. And Jeff Keighley's thing as well, like his Summer Game Fest. This year, we obviously had a lot more of a traditional E3, albeit digital. But I would honestly say, even still after that, like we still had Microsoft, we still had Nintendo, we still had a lot of third-party publishers, we still had all the showcases. And I would honestly say Wholesome Games, like this year's Wholesome Games Showcase, like it was like the Wholesome Direct was very much the highlight of the summer for me. At least, sorry, I have to say this in fairness, being honest, until the Annapurna Showcase.
Yeah, that's fair. That's fair.
Until the Annapurna Showcase, I would honestly say the Wholesome Direct was the best event of the summer. And so, yeah, I just sort of wanted to sort of get your idea of how you think the reaction has been to this year's show anyway.
Being ranked alongside the Annapurna Showcase in any way, like it's already like mind-blowing for us. Like that I found back when we were like putting together a Wikipedia page for like E3 2021, and it was like it features showcases from organizations like Devolver Digital, Wholesome Games, and Nintendo. And I was like, one of these is not like the others. Like it was so mind-blowing to be like even just like mentioned alongside these groups in any way.
Yeah, and I mean, it really is the fulfillment of that E3 dream, to bring it back to Steve, because it's like we were really worried, at least I was, like we had some, last year we got out ahead of E3 a little bit, like, and I know E3 didn't happen last year, but that like time of year. And we thought like, oh, we'll just be like a little appetizer, like we won't have any real competition. It'll just be this neat little thing you can see before the real stuff gets going. And then this year we had an opportunity to like be on the front page of Twitch and stuff like that if we were part of that main E3 weekend. And I was so terrified because I just thought we're going to have this little pocket. And I even had, to be fair, I had a couple developers contact me that were like, we don't know about this. Like we were going to launch our Kickstarter on the day of the Direct, but now you're launching the Direct in the middle of E3 and we're worried we're going to get drowned out. And which is totally fair. And I didn't have the answer to that. I just thought, well, this is a cool opportunity. Let's see if we can make it work. And with the additional exposure of things like Twitch and IGN and stuff like that. So to see that work out, that was single-handedly the biggest relief, to see that people continue to talk about it, that it shows up on Wikipedia, like James said, or on all these like recaps and stuff. That's the biggest relief.
And then Matthew emailed that developer, well. Looks like a few people saw your game, huh? No, we were just as scared as they were, for sure.
I was ready to put like $1,000 in their Kickstarter as an apology.
Just to make
Sorry.
Well, like I said, the showcase, like the Direct, was just for me the highlight of that entire E3. And I think as well, also because a lot like this E3 sort of epitomized how much I was more looking forward to a lot more wholesome and indie games in general. Because like the only AAA game that I was really excited to see this entire E3 was Starfield. That was it. Everything else was just entirely indie and or wholesome for me. Like, and maybe that's just me as a person, but like, anyway, that I digress.
Is Psychonauts 2 AAA?
Yeah, for sure.
Okay, that
published by Microsoft.
Yeah, that's fair. I always forget about that.
But I mean, I think the E3 period and everything is like a good example of how I think there's room for both to coexist, because like I watched the other showcases and it's fun to see like giant bombastic, like new Halo trailer, whatever it may be. And then Wholesome Games is such a different thing that like there's so much room for both of those experiences.
Yeah.
It is also funny just as like such small fish, because I would see like strangers on Twitter saying like indie games won E3, like all these AAA studios need to like watch how Wholesome Direct was to like see how to do it. And in my head, I was just like, no, they're gonna be mad at me. Like I don't like. I was like, I'm not like trying to start a feud with this. I think it's
you are, James. Let's be real here. You are looking to start a fight here. You are.
No, like all the like trouble I try to stir, that like wasn't one of them, because I am like fortunate enough to like sometimes get included in like groups of like community managers and stuff like that in games. And so I think that's given me a new perspective on like when I see, especially with like Wholesome Direct stuff, people say like they need to like watch and learn how like Wholesome Games did it. And I'm like, they know exactly how Wholesome Games did it. Like sometimes their like bosses don't go along with it, or they're like other reasons, like they have other like content partners that like kind of have their hands tied and things like that. And so I think when you like start to see it from that perspective, it's like a lot more complicated than it can seem from Twitter. But yeah, like I full disclosure, I was like over the moon, like going down like recent tweets and seeing like, here's my ranking. And honestly, so often if they saw Wholesome Direct, they would rank it like number 1. But even if it was like ranked number 3 or 4, it was like 3 or 4 behind like Nintendo and Sony and like these people where I'm like, I never in a million years would have thought that I'd do anything that
Well, Sony didn't have a showcase this year, but
No.
well,
so you can't trust those
also them
tweets?
ranking us behind that.
Yeah, they were ranking you behind a non-existent showcase.
This is like when I was so like, we released our first game and I was so happy because Peter Molyneux said something nice about it. And then Matthew was like, that's a parody account. They're making fun of it. I was like,
Peter
I'm so bad
Molyneux.
at the
Oh
internet.
no.
Yeah.
Was it actually the Peter Molyneux account? Or was it just...
No, it was a parody account. It was.
No, I mean,
it
like
was-
there used to be, I don't know if it's still going, but there used to be a parody account on Twitter called Peter Molyneux.
Yeah, I think
Might
it
have been.
was that one, and that's why like me and my like total, because Matthew's been on like social media a lot longer than I have, and like a lot more has better instincts about those things, certainly than I did in 2015. And I remember just seeing it being like, has a ton of followers. I guess that's the real guy, and he like thinks our game's clever, so cool. And then a little bit of heartbreak.
But yeah, the response to this year's Direct, I mean, I didn't think we could top the previous one, was really worried about viewership and all that stuff, and then it did its job.
I think what really excited me this year about, and just to sort of touch on a general point that you made, Jenny, in regards to sort of your own reaction. There was obviously a lot of great games in that showcase. That's actually how I basically sort of curated all these interviews over the past month and a half. But like the one big game in particular that stood out for me is actually from my part of the woods, which is Northern Ireland. And about 90 minutes from here is Belfast. And that is where Amber Tail are, making Amber Eye, Jordan Bradley, and Noel Waters. And I was so excited to see them just sort of get their moment. And like I was actually with Jordan and Noel about a week before, and we're just sort of talking about, oh, it's good. Like how do you guys feel about just sort of being part of the showcase? Just sort of like, are you scared? Are you nervous? Because it was like the first big showing of the game, and like they'd only been set up like 6 months since they left their last gig doing Paleo Pines. And I was just like, are you nervous? Are you scared? Like, how do you feel? It was genuinely wonderful just to talk to them about that. And then when I saw Amber in the Direct, it was just basically the equivalent of that scene in Once Upon a Time with Leo DiCaprio, that sort of moment going like, I know them.
I think that's like so one of the best things about the online showcases is that sort of accessibility that like it costs a fortune to come from like Ireland or anywhere else to like the US, and there are like passport issues and all these other things for like showcasing in person. And then online it's a way more level playing field. Like there's language gaps sometimes, there's definitely time zones that are a problem, but it's something we really like try to be mindful of. Like one thing that I was really happy with is last year when we did the holiday snack, we very purposefully wanted to represent like, yes, and the Northern Hemisphere, for a lot of us, we like associate this time of year with like snow and like cold weather, but we want to make sure like we know there are developers in this who are from places that are like hot as hell right now. So it was really nice. Like in the middle of that, we have Paulina from Dragon Bear Studio like out in the park, and it's like super sunny, like introducing.
Yeah, that's an
Enchanted.
example of developers being game for anything, because I was like, I think it'd be really funny if you were like just summering like while talking
Yeah, like
about
as
the
summery as
holidays.
it gets. So that was great.
Yeah, also to speak to like the I know those people mindset, like I remember the Button City folks, like they live streamed the first Wholesome Direct, and we started with Button City, and I remember them like their live stream had them getting set up, like getting their laptop ready, like okay, we're ready to watch, and then they heard their music and they like jump up, like oh my god, it's happening, start like tweeting and everything. So
Yeah,
like
they're like, we didn't know it was going to be so early.
yeah, so that I love seeing that kind of reaction from developers. That's
It's
the
just so
coolest.
fun in general. That was like another thing I was so excited about this year is when we were like deciding the order of the showcase. I was so excited to start the showcase with Bird Problems, because I was like, we're going to start the showcase with a game where both the like Twitch audience watching and a lot of the like professional like game journalists watching will just be like speechless. Like it's so weird, it's so unique that like I really like cherish that opportunity to start with something where I won't name names, but I like went back and like rewatched some of the like the bigger outlets like live streams of the direct, and there was one that was so great because they're like leading into it and talking about like, here's what we know about Wholesome Games, here's sort of what our expectations are, here's the context for E3 in general this year. And then Bird Problems hits and it just instantly becomes so much more casual, because like no one has a script set up for that. And I'm really grateful that we got to include that one in the showcase this year.
Yeah, that's a curveball for sure.
Oh god, that was a curveball, especially considering what Bird Problems is basically. I love that. Such a good start. And then obviously, like you say as well, with the running order, I'm so glad actually you sort of put Amber Isle close to the end, because then I think that sort of made the anticipation for it build a bit more anyway. It was
that's nice.
It was such a wonderful moment. Like I remember actually, so Twitch actually runs ahead of YouTube by about 30-45 seconds. And I remember watching Twitch, like a lot of the NIGDN Discord, the Northern Ireland Game Dev Network Discord, was watching on YouTube, and I was watching on Twitch because I was also sort of covering it for Played Hours, and they were behind, and I saw Amber Isle pop up because I had actually seen the trailer just before the Wholesome Direct, embargoed by Jordan, and I recognized the sort of first 2 seconds immediately. Go like, that's it, and then I posted the GIF of Leo in Once Upon a Time in the Discord. It's like, Johnny, we're about 30 seconds behind. It was like, and then someone basically, I posted the GIF, and then someone basically posted an image of it. Then when it came up on YouTube, it's just like, whatever. I have the best reaction. I have a GIF. You have just this pistol image. Oh god,
that's fantastic.
Oh no, I mean, like I was happy for them guys. I really am. On that sort of same subject, then, you sort of mentioned in passing the Wholesome Snacks. Is there any plans for the rest of the year?
There are no formal plans currently. It doesn't mean it couldn't materialize quickly, because that's kind of the thing with the snacks, is we're able to move really quickly.
Like everything we do is like planned a month in advance. So
yeah, exactly. So
basically every Wholesome Games project is us being like, do you think we could do this? And we're like, well, we'll try it and see what happens. And then
it'd be cool if blank.
Last year I got Matthew a record player for his birthday on August 2nd of last year, and he said it'd be cool if we like could curate a Wholesome Games record. And then like a month later there's a Wholesome Games record. So it's so much fun to do stuff like that. We've been so lucky. It's wild.
With the snacks specifically, like the first one came about because we had friends at Serenity Forge that were like, hey, we've got like 3 games we can announce, like, and that in of itself is really cool. And then we thought, it'd be neat to like have some updates from developers that you saw in the direct, like Button City and Snacko. And then the holiday snack, it was just I don't even know how that one came about. I think we just thought like, hey, there's kind of this dead zone in the industry where nothing happens. It'd be fun if we had this like cozy little showcase and made it like holiday themed. So we're still kind of waiting on that next idea, like what would make another snack interesting. But I will say it's really cool to do the big bombastic directs with like 60 plus games. Like that gets a lot of people to tune in. And when those people tune in, it helps the developers. So there's always got to be kind of that hook there that makes it make sense for developers to get involved.
With those directs, are you intending on sort of keeping those sort of traditional once a year E3 type thing?
I think so, especially as long as, as long as those opportunities exist with places like Twitch and stuff, because it's such a relief to have that guaranteed audience that are going to see the games. Because like I said, I'm always so nervous that developers are going to put a lot of work into it and then no one will see it. So as long as that opportunity exists, I think they'll probably stay around E3. And that's kind of just the spirit of it in general, is the E3 vibe.
Two more questions. I realize I've run over a little over half an hour more than I initially said. I apologize immensely.
Oh, it's been fun.
Sorry.
So we sort of actually mentioned this in passing, but like what is Wholesome Games in terms of how it's perceived? Is it a genre? Is it a movement? Because like I keep alluding to it as a movement, and I said this to others, but like, what would be the right definition of it then? Like, basically that then.
Wholesome Games is what happens when you're busy making other plans.
What?
Go
I
off,
think-
Ferris Bueller. Go
Wholesome
off.
Games was was your friend all along.
Yeah.
In your heart.
I think it's what I want genres to be. Like I said earlier, like, the current definition of genres in games, it really sticks out like a sore thumb. So I think that's why we'd be hesitant to call it a genre. Because like I said, it's not mechanical at all. It's entirely about how you feel and kind of what it represents. But at the same time, I'm eager to call it a genre because I would like genres to become that. Like I think that would be a lot more descriptive and helpful for finding games that people enjoy. So I'm cool with genre. I think movement is like something I'm not allowed to say because it sounds really pompous. Like
I've heard people say label, like not
label's
in the
cool.
derogatory sense of like putting labels on things, but like literally in the same way that like, I don't know, a record label, like especially back in the day, would represent like this type of artist, and like we have these standards. I think it's kind of like that. Like with Wholesome Games, I feel like there's those two important prongs where it's not just like identifying what our audience likes and what like appeals to our like own like sort of values for Wholesome Games, but also that like quality bar. Like we don't really like share or curate anything that's like uplifting, but like too early. Like I hesitate to say bad, because I mean that's usually what it comes down to when like a game gets submitted in some way that like isn't ready for prime time yet. It's just a matter of like making sure we're like meeting people's expectations about like, this is a game that's far enough along that it's probably going to get finished, and this is a game that like is far enough along that you can like understand and appreciate from a GIF like what it's going for.
It's worth your time.
What about you,
Yeah, I
Jenny?
think like extreme respect for the audience's time is like a big guideline for us in general.
What about you, Jenny? Like, what how would you sort of see it?
I also see it more of as a descriptor, or like on Steam, how they have tags now, like not just genre markings, but they have tags to help further denote the type of game that you're diving into. Again, I like Matthew, I would love for it to become a genre eventually at some point. But I think as it stands right now, yeah, like a curating body is kind of where it's at, and sort of more of what James is saying in terms of just making sure that folks know how we're curating, what we look for, what we like to present, so that they know that we're the ones that they come to for, that they can come to consistently. What I do have to say is I'm really excited by the fact that there are other sort of genres and aesthetics that are utilizing this as well. And I think that's been really exciting to see. And this is kind of like maybe too big and too far away, but
Dream
I
big,
feel like
dream big, Jenny, dream big.
Well, okay, I feel like genres are starting to become sort of nebulous and a thing of the past. And I know this is a thing that game developers across the world are probably going to hate me for saying, but I think more and more, like when I pick games, I choose less by genre and more by like almost mood or intent, or like the type of experience I want to go into. And I think that's what Wholesome Games are starting to allude to, is that it's like a post genre, post mechanically defined genre.
No, I think you're right. I think there's such a need for it, because like we do live in a world where people say like this game has RPG elements, and they're referring to like things that are in just about every game now. Like it is like it's more about the creative promise. I think like that's something we talk about amongst ourselves as developers. It's like big picture, what does this game let the player do? And it's like, well, you can go to like a psychic summer camp, or you can like cook this like soup pot dish for yourself or your friends. Like I think that's kind of where it's headed. Is like it's not about the features that you implement to give people that experience. It's about the experience that you're targeting.
Yeah. Who knows? Probably 50 years too early for that. So
Can you excuse me for just 2 minutes? My dog's prancing about, and I think he wants out. I'm sorry, 2 minutes.
No problem. No problem.
no problem. Oh, looks like a little Westie.
Oh yeah, he's so. As soon as I saw his head pop up when he woke up, I was like, that's a cute dog.
That's a really cute dog.
Sorry about that.
That's all right.
My dog is now basically out in what I'll call the prison gardens. Basically, he's sort of on lockdown for his little escapades last week for his escape. So he's basically grounded.
Poor
thing.
Well, poor thing. What about me? What about me?
Yeah, I was talking about you.
The anxiety he gave me last week when he did his great escape. Anyway, what was I going to say? I completely lost my train of thought now. That's what happens when you sort of have to look after a dog who's basically grounded.
That's all right. We're talking about the genre. Jenny was talking about abolishing all genres.
Yeah.
Yes. I got
her personal decree.
Yeah.
Queen
Secret
Jenny
agenda.
Queen Jenny decrees.
Yeah, that's in the Jenny manifesto.
Yeah. To be published later.
Final question then. Like I mentioned this to, I think it was Ryan and Shandine Woodward. I mentioned this too. But like, what is the sort of end game then in terms of the Wholesome movement? And like, is there an end game even? Because like, I think I mentioned to them maybe more of a presence of Wholesome Games at, say, a physical event like a PAX or an EGX outside of America, something like that there. I don't know. But like, in terms of Wholesome Games as a thing, not necessarily Wholesome Games, the Twitter account, the community and stuff like that there, but more Wholesome Games as whatever you want to call it. Is there an end game? And if there is, what is it?
I think a lot of it has already happened. Like, I think there are a lot more opportunities for these kind of games than there were a couple of years ago. But James wrote the first press release for Wholesome Direct, the first one we did, and he had this line about like, we basically just want these games to be taken as seriously as the really gritty games. Like we want to show that they're just as emotionally complex and like interesting as the games that typically win awards, because typically games like this don't get that spotlight at those award shows and stuff. So I think in general, like just changing that basic perception of like, it's not just for kids, it's not just casual, like whatever it may be, these games are valid and these games are out there. I think at the end of the day, like on the real big picture side of things, that's got to be one of the biggest goals.
James, what about you?
I don't know. It's honestly, everything has surprised me so much that it's felt almost like fruitless to try to think about like what's next or what the ceiling is for this, because if we'd stuck to like what I originally thought that was, it was like Twitter account with 100 followers, people occasionally sending in saying like, you should check out this game, I think it's cool. So as a result, I haven't spent too much time thinking about it, but I will say every time that I hear about like developers being taken advantage of in any way, whether it's like some sort of like promotional opportunity that turns out to be bogus, which there are plenty of, like a bad, like unfair publishing deal, like anything like that. And I start to think of that in the context of the connections and the resources that we have through Wholesome Games. And like, is there a way that we can get to a point where we can help people avoid that, where we can, I don't want to say like right these wrongs, but like when I think of it in terms of if I could prevent one like really great developer from ending up in a situation that like makes them miserable or makes them want to like quit making games, then I think, well, that would be worth it. And so I don't know exactly what form that takes, but it's definitely what comes to mind for me for what I want to do next.
Jenny, what about you?
That's what I was going to say. I think, it's like the first goal was to promote and just to, kind of create a space. And I think that space is here. And I think we're going to continue to foster and cultivate and tend to the space. But I agree. I think now that we sort of have this sort of comfort level in where we're at, I find my attention looking at sustainability and what can we do to help not only create a space for devs to come in, but not just make one game and say, you know what, maybe the industry is not for me because I've had XYZ experiences, but find ways to allow people to sustainably create in the industry and make it more than just a place where people come and burn out after a few years. That tends to be what happens to a lot of developers.